talking about Australian history being full of beautiful lies that are really true. Well, have you heard about the American, the German and the Irishman that worked on a bar? Well, it's true. That's how Bourke began. Three unlikely immigrants began Bourke. A Prussian, a guy called Becker, Joseph Becker, an American called William Sly, and a bloke with an Irish background, John Kelly, along with Vincent Dowling, an Englishman. This is probably the first grave in Bourke we know of anyway. Little boy Henry Sly, son of an American, William Sly, who came to Bourke right at the very beginnings, 1860, and built probably the first building here we know of, which was a pub, and ironically with a name like Sly, well obviously it was going to be called a Sly Grog Shop. But yes, he'd come from the south, around the Riverina, followed the river up, and was one of the first settlers here, and along with those other four men started the little embryonic town of Bourke at the top of the Darling, which grew to be a major port. In 1859, not long after the first riverboat got past Bourke, this young man's father, Vincent Dowling, arrived in Bourke with cattle from Maitland. The arrival of the riverboat, of course, signalled the possibility that transport could make stations viable out here. Vincent Dowling was just a young man. Bourke was settled by young people, really. He was only about 24. And he, with another young bloke, John Kelly, who was only about 19 years old, explored all the country north of Bourke up towards the Paru, Kootaburra, towards Thargomindah, and loosely began something they declared to be Fort Bourke Station. So Dowling spent probably 10-15 years in this region and then a bit further north, and did very, very well for himself. Both men experienced all sorts of dramas. I mean, they had skirmishes with the Aboriginal people, spears and boomerangs, and this guy's uncle was killed by Aboriginal people out here. But both Kelly and Vincent Dowling made a real point of not getting into fights and backing off if they had the chance, and tried to make friends where they could. But both had to turn their hand at just about anything they could find to do. Dowling eventually moved away towards Mudgee and Rylstone and became a famous horse breeder down that way. If you go to the Anglican church here in Bourke, he dedicated the font there. He was Oxford educated and kept copious diaries, and would you believe it, he wrote poetry as well. So it's sort of in the blood for young people who came out here, and the Dowling family associated with the very, very beginnings of Bourke. We talked about the cluster of pioneering families, the Bloxhams here and the Morrisons there, and I mentioned Becker, the Prussian. He set up a big store right on the punt, where the punt is, the punt crossing was across near the wharf, and became known as the King of Bourke. He was an enterprising businessman, entrepreneur, hard driving but generous, lavish. His store reputedly was doing something like £1 million worth of business in those days, because it was the only thing at the top of the river, and it was servicing all the new stations that were growing north and west of Bourke, up into Queensland even, because the riverboats terminated here pretty much. So they had a massive enterprise, bought up a lot of the land in Bourke, helped develop it. Soon after him came the Bloxham family, a couple of brothers from down south who'd been educated in England, good schools. One of them was an author, wrote 2 or 3 books about Bourke. One of them became a mayor of Bourke. They helped develop this district and worked on some of the big stations like Tyrrell as managers, started newspapers, ran businesses. You know, just a very energetic, pioneering family. And then the Morrison family behind here came soon after, and they began the coaching link, which of course the Cobb & Co coaches ran from the top of Queensland down to Victoria. The Morrison family had a sort of a coach line around Bourke up towards Cunnamulla and back down the river towards Tilpa. And at one stage 3 of the brothers were actually mayors of Wilcannia, Cobar and Bourke. So it's amazing how clusters of families, energetic families, can make a difference in a very remote and pioneering area. It's families that are strong.